Hi everyone, yes, I still have my Christmas tree up. I made an executive decision to leave it up until the end of January because I am feeling the need this year to extend the Yule festivities as long as humanly possible. So I had a few different ideas for what kind of video I wanted to make today, and I'm not totally satisfied with any of them. They are topics I'm going to come back to or wait. So instead today I think I'm going to return to a topic that I have talked about quite a lot on the channel, especially in the last maybe 2 years. I know that I started to make videos when I was still in Edinburgh about this topic, so maybe particularly while I was still in Edinburgh. And this was a problem that I had with exhaustion, overwhelm, ebbs and flows of energy, and really being very frustrated that I was struggling to be consistent and to be able to maintain a specific kind of lifestyle and various different habits. So my tendency is, and many of you probably experience this, and I have been talking to quite a few people actually recently, quite a handful of people who have been experiencing similar kind of stuff to this. But essentially it's a problem with burnout. I will push myself to be very productive and very active and consistently ticking off all the boxes on my to-do lists and so on. I'll be doing that very consistently for a number of weeks or even months, and then I will just stumble at some point and fall and just not be able to get myself back up again for sometimes weeks or even months at a time. And I just experience this exhaustion and burnout and a lack of motivation. I think that's the deepest problem, a severe lack of motivation and lack of energy to get myself back on track and to pick back up where I left off. And it affects me in various different ways. I mean, it does affect my productivity in general in terms of what work I get done and just my output in general. I start to feel very out of control in my life, and I'm just letting a lot of stuff slide that I really wanted to be consistent with. So, you know, my presence online included. And that was especially true when I was balancing the PhD with trying to have an online presence and create content and so on. And it will also impact hugely my exercise, so my physical health, and also really just even in terms of housework like cooking and cleaning and things like that. I will end up doing the bare bones and doing the basics and just not being very satisfied with how I'm looking after myself. But all of that also does play into my spiritual life, because when I'm in that kind of state, I'm obviously not finding the time or the energy for spiritual practice, for really engaging my mind in spiritual things and expanding my mind and so on. It really is a true burnout. I think my inclination is essentially just not to get out of bed or not to get out off the couch and just to do nothing. And so I will get up and do whatever work it is that needs to be done, that absolutely needs to be done, and then that's all that I will find the energy in myself to do. And I haven't been able to find a reason for this. I haven't been able to get a handle on it and get control over it for many, many, many years now. I think, to be fair, I think that back in my early 20s, the times of productivity and being energetic and feeling great were very few and far between. And I do think that all of the positive habits that I built up, that I maintain when I'm in one of my kind of upswings, they are all new, relatively new habits that I've developed really only over the past sort of 7 years or so. I say new, I mean from my kind of mid-20s onwards. It's been a long time now. I've been doing this a long time and I'm starting to feel sort of old. My 20s now, looking back on them, just seem really, really long. There are so many different phases to my 20s. So yeah, to be fair to myself, and this is something that if you struggle with this kind of thing, it might be worth thinking about too. There was a version of me not that long ago, you know, in my early to mid 20s, that just didn't really do any of this stuff ever, that really only managed to do the bare bones of everything ever, and actually just never even really tried to do anything outside of that. Like, there was a very kind of low energy, low motivation version of myself that went to college or went to work and just did what had to be done, ticked off the sort of absolute musts, you know, did the work that I needed to do, got like my productivity was okay, that I was functioning, you know, I always did well in college and that kind of thing. But I wasn't exercising, I wasn't meditating, I didn't have a spiritual practice in my very early 20s. I wasn't really reading much again in my early 20s. I wasn't really thinking much. I just sort of socialised and did work and slept. And again, with the housework and looking after myself, minimal, like bare minimum kind of deal. So, and it's worth looking at that in your own life too and thinking, well, even if you were a powerhouse at some point in your life before, maybe you've gotten loads of other responsibilities into your life now. Like if you've had kids or even just moving in with a partner, that changes your whole structure of your life as well. And it adds in a lot of extra stuff that needs to be done in the day. So, and also maybe you look back and realize, yeah, I used to be like that. Like when I was in my 20s at some point, I wasn't a high functioning human being. I was sort of barely getting along with life, barely managing to get through the necessary parts. And you do gradually over time, I think, especially in this spiritual community, we tend to be very connected to self-development and so on. And a lot of the time we are aiming to do a huge amount more than your average person actually ever manages to achieve. We are aiming to perfect ourselves in so many different ways. And I do think that the alternative spiritual community, it turns our mind to that. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. Like, it's obviously a very good thing to be able to find control over our lives and to be able to make room, make space, make time for other endeavours and for thinking about what it really matters to us in creative projects and spiritual projects and so on. I think it's a really, really positive thing. But we are really trying to squeeze an awful lot into a life, into a day, into a week, into a month. There's a huge amount that is being shoved into that. And it's also worth mentioning that the whole exercise thing, I think even 10 years ago, an exercise craze thing, like people who went for people who went for jogs, people who went running, people who went to the gym, they were less common. Like, it was less common to be a person who did those things. And we've kind of gradually become more aware of the importance of exercise to our health, which is great, it's important, but it takes out a huge chunk out of our time if that's something that we've only started doing in the past 10 or 20 years. So to be honest, one of the biggest things that I've been really trying to do recently in the last few months, when I do find myself in a sort of fallow time, in a time where not much is getting done and I'm not managing to tick those boxes, and I'm noticing as a result that my spirituality is really starting to wane, I try to remind myself that there were years in my life where I really got none of those things done at all. And even if I look back over a year and think, well, maybe I only spent 2/3 of that time ticking all those boxes, or even half, that's still a huge amount more time than I would have been spending on that stuff, say 5 or 7 years ago. I wouldn't have been spending any time meditating or any time doing yoga, any time at the altar, any time reading reading non-fiction about things that really interest me. I wouldn't have been spending any time running. Even last year, I started weightlifting a year ago, on and off. Again, I look back over the last year and I think, I could look at it and say, oh, I really only spent, maybe 4 months in the last year actively working on my strength training, but that's 4 months more than I ever did in any year ever before. So I think that's one kind of perspective I've been trying to take on this. And I think removing the guilt from it really helps. And I think it helps to maybe allow you to shove some of the stuff to one side and say, okay, I'm not managing to get that done right now. I will get back to it. But the most important thing for me to maybe try to work on again right now is this one thing. And so for me, with coming out of the PhD and the exhaustion that I was feeling after that, that's been my worst period of exhaustion and lack of motivation and lack of energy in the past 12 months. I think because I had a valid excuse, it was easier for me in a way to accept that and to feel okay about that. But I really did just sort of look at my life and say, right, okay, what's the most important thing that needs to be done right now? And everything else can go out the window. I haven't written any fiction in a few years, but I'm okay with that because I know that in the past I have actually managed to spend a certain amount of time working on that, and I know I'll come back to it in the future. And I've been trying to sort of think that same way about lots of different areas of my life, and sometimes exercise included. Exercise is one that I try to keep in the mix, but if you can't, you can't. And if you're physically exhausted, then going for a walk might be the most that you can manage to do. And I think one thing that's really important to bear in mind in all of this as well, in how it relates to your spiritual practice and your spiritual life, is that your spirituality really is a journey in this kind of alternative community. But just in general, I think our inner religious or spiritual experiences and the time that we spend thinking spiritually and feeling spiritually and actually really engaging with that on a meaningful level. I think no matter what our religion or no matter what our culture, it is limited. Like we don't always have the space and the time for that kind of level of of engagement. And that is completely okay. I think, especially when we're on a self-made path, I know I've talked about this in the past, it's really, really easy to feel overwhelmed and to feel we have to constantly be working really hard at this thing because it's not ready-made for us. It's not just something where we have to turn up to a building once a week and sit there for an hour and then we get to check that, off the list. It's a lot more involved than that, and it often requires a huge amount of time for us to feel like we're doing it right. And I do think that that's problematic, and I think it's something that I've managed to train myself out of in the last year. I've managed to realise, again, with this idea that even if I only spend 3 months out of the year where I'm actually really thinking about my spirituality every day, where I'm actually sitting down to the altar for more than just that kind of a 5 or 10 minute meditation, I'm actually kind of engaged with the symbolism, that I'm actually praying, that I'm actually, going through the prayer beads or giving offerings or anything like that. If I'm really only spending 3 months out of the year reading about spirituality, coming up with new ideas to enliven my spiritual life, reading about mythology or anything like that. If there's only 3 months out of the year that I can find the energy in myself to do that in a dedicated way, that's huge. That's huge progress. I've still moved forward immensely from where I was at the beginning of that year to where I am having spent those 3 months working on that diligently. So spiritual practice, it's not... I think to some degree it can be a muscle, and in terms of meditation and being able to kind of get into an altered state of consciousness, yes, it is kind of a muscle, like it is kind of a skill that you can kind of lose a bit, and it can take a little while to get back into it. If you haven't meditated much in a year or two, it might take you a while to get back into the same kind of meditative states that you once were able to attain. It will take a little while, but I think that it's much like riding a bike or even exercise. You'll find that with exercise as well, because of muscle memory and your body, because it's learned to do something before, it won't take it half as long to get back to where you kind of left off, because it remembers. It's like, yeah, we've done this before, that's fine, I can catch up. And I think your spiritual practice in general is even more so. I think you might lose a little bit in terms of the habit of, or the skill of getting yourself into a certain mental state and so on, if that's something that's important to you in your practice. But I think the leveling up and the time spent thinking about things and the time spent engaging with symbolism and so on, I don't think I think that just accumulates over time, and you don't have to think of that as something that's draining away because you haven't spent time on it in a while. You can think of it more as just a body of experience and knowledge that you have been gradually building up over the years, year by year, and that is just there for you to return to and to tap back into whenever you're ready. And I think for me, thinking of it that way has really helped to free me and has made me feel less anxious about making the time for that kind of endeavour all the time, because it's just not realistic. We have different things in our lives that we will need to turn our minds to at different times, and we're not always going to have that, because it's not just time in your day as well. I think doing that kind of work, it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of motivation, it takes a lot of mental space, and if you've got a lot going on mentally, you may not find that you have the time and energy to be coming up with new rituals, creating a new altar, coming up with a new practice. You may just need to keep falling back on old practices and just feel like you're barely keeping up, that you're doing the bare minimum, but that's okay. And I would really like to invite you to think of, the next time that you think to yourself, oh, I would love to sit down at my altar and, draw tarot cards and go through my prayer beads and go through a big, long dedication or invocation to a certain deity and do a 20-minute meditation. But I can't, A, I don't have time, or B, I just can't motivate myself to do that. It just seems exhausting. All I can manage to do is to sit down at the altar for 2 minutes and just light some candles and sit for 2 minutes, 5 minutes. I really invite you to look at that time, to look at those 2 minutes that you choose to spend at your altar and see it not as you failing to do something, but as a gift, as an amazing opportunity, as a beautiful time, as a beautiful thing that you are doing in your life to remind yourself that you are a spiritual person, that you engage with the world in a spiritual way. And that it doesn't have to be less than this big elaborate daily practice that you wish that you had and that you wish you could return to. That being said, on the flip side, I am also going to make an argument for the power of habit and routine, and how, yes, if you're feeling really, really dissatisfied with your spiritual practice and you're feeling really sad about not managing to make that time for that daily spiritual practice and for sitting and reading and so on, then yeah, maybe it is time that you need to do something in your life to kickstart that and to just get things moving and to get yourself on the right track. And yeah, that can be really hard. This can be really, really difficult. This is something that I work with clients with quite a lot. I mean, this is one of the major reasons that people will seek a mentoring session with me, is if they are really struggling to motivate themselves to do a practice. They had a practice of some kind in the past, something has changed in their life, and maybe they've moved, maybe they're in a smaller home, maybe they're sharing with new people, maybe they're just exhausted, overwhelmed, maybe they just fell out of the habit and just can't bring themselves to start doing it again. There's some block in the way, and it can take the full hour oftentimes to find that little spark or just a little knob of you kind of click it on. It just, something kind of goes whoop, like, oh yeah, okay, I got it, I've got that motivation now, like that's the spark of interest, or that's the thing that I need to think about or work on or do differently. But I'm quite sure that many of those clients then go away and might still continue to struggle to build that practice up, because it's tough. It is really tough, and I can't explain it. It's a strange phenomenon that there are so many things in this life that we desperately wish we had the motivation to do, and yet we don't. There's this disconnect between the person that we wish that we were, and we feel that we would be happier if we were being that person, and the person that we actually are. So what I've been doing in the last, it's really only been like a week or 2 weeks maybe, but I'm feeling particularly optimistic about this go around, like this particular new routine that I've gotten myself into. I do this a lot. I do get into new routines a lot and feel like I've finally answered all of my problems, but this time around I'm actually feeling particularly optimistic about it. And I will say that, okay, I'll start at the beginning. Sometimes when you're trying to change up one area of your life, there may be something else in your life that you also actually need to change, because if you're trying to make room for something and there just isn't room for it in your schedule, you're not finding the time, you're not finding the mental space, then something else has got to change, right? Like there's something that needs to come out of your routine or come out of your life. You need to kind of back up and make a little bit of room somehow in order to find that space and time and kind of go, oh, I've got a free 10 minutes now that I wouldn't usually have, for example. Maybe I can do something spiritually, or while I'm sitting on my reading chair now and my books are in front of me within arm's reach, and because this is the habit that I've gotten myself into, so I suppose I might as well pull down a book and read. I'm a big proponent of habit. I think habit is an incredibly powerful thing, and when you're not in the good habit that you used to be in, I think it's easy to convince yourself like, oh, habits schmabits, like if I tried to leap out of bed right now and do yoga like I used to first thing in the morning, I would be too tired, it would be unenjoyable. And yet once you get back into that habit, you realise like, oh no, this is effortless. And that, in my experience, is the power of a habit. If you're in the habit of getting out of bed, dragging yourself out of bed and then doing something very passive for the first half hour of your day, in my experience anyway, you will continue to feel exhausted and passive and like you couldn't possibly be doing anything else with that time. So what I have done is very simple. I just started getting up earlier. I was getting up pretty late by my standards, and I wasn't happy with it. And I just was like, right, okay, I'm going to start getting up earlier. I have very, very little social obligations right now. I'm only meeting people once a week. I meet my bubble once a week, and then I have a late night. But every 6 other nights of the week, even if I'm on Zoom with somebody or something, we're usually done by a very reasonable hour. Like, I'm not being kept up drinking or out at a pub or out for dinner or anything like that in the evening. So there's nothing stopping me from, this is the time in my life. If I'm ever going to get into a good habit of getting up early, it's now. So I started getting up early, and I started pushing it back very gradually, 5 or 10 minutes earlier every single day. And through doing that, so first of all, because I live in Northern Europe, getting up early means I'm getting up quite a bit before dawn and it's still dark outside, and the first thing that I want to do once it gets light is go for a walk or a run. I want to get outside, preferably before the rest of the world starts getting up and out and doing their exercise, so that's not too crowded, and I want to get my exercise in. So by getting up earlier, like a stretch before dawn, I'm giving myself space, I'm giving myself time in which there's really nothing else that I can do with myself except all the things that I haven't been doing in the last like 12 months. So the first thing that I started doing is doing yoga again immediately after I get up. So, you know, after I'm kind of up and dressed and teeth brushed and all that good stuff, then I do yoga. And that's been fantastic. I don't know if it's the getting up early, if it's the kind of jumping out of bed because I know that there's things that I want to get done quickly or what it is, but I've been feeling just so much more energetic, especially in the mornings, and really throughout the whole day. And then after that I go and I've been doing 20 minutes of meditation, and then because I was doing 20 minutes meditation in the morning, I started thinking, oh, I'd love to be doing 20 minutes meditation again in the evening, because that's something that I used to do, and I started doing that too. I've just started making the time for that because I've already started with the good habit in the morning and I kind of just want to keep it going. And then I go out and do my exercise or whatever, and then I come back and start my work at the same time that I would have if I hadn't done all of that other stuff when I was getting up later. So the answer for you might not be getting up early. I'm not saying that that's going to be the answer to everyone. Maybe you already got up really early and you've got kids to look after or an early job to get to. Maybe you start work at 7 or 8 a.m. or something like that. So getting up earlier in the morning isn't going to be the answer for you. But there may be something like that in your routine that can be changed, that can be switched, that can be done more efficiently, something that is not really bringing you any value that you can cut back or maybe not eliminate entirely from your life, but shorten. You know, say to yourself, I'm not going to sit down to watch Netflix until X time in the evening. And that's another thing that I've been doing as well. Like I don't sit down to watch Netflix until like 8:30 at the very earliest. And usually it'll be later, and sometimes I don't really sit down to watch TV at all now at the moment because I'm just in this habit of going to bed early and wanting to make time for meditation. But that's been my own trick. So I've been doing a bit of reading, I've been doing a bit of spiritual thinking. Like I say, I've been doing a lot of meditation. And I feel at the moment like this is still groundwork. I do eventually want to get to a point where I have a more dedicated spiritual practice that I'm working on every day, where I feel I'm still not back at the point, and not that I want to go back in time, I want to move forward, but I'm still not at an equivalent point to when I felt like my spirituality was at its strongest. But I can tell that I'm really laying very important foundation, very important groundwork right now that I'm going to be building on in the weeks and months to come. And I'm going to keep winding back my waking time until it gets to a point where I feel like realistically I can't really kind of bring it back any further if I ever want to be able to socialise ever again. And then I can keep building in those little habits into my morning. So yeah, that's been the way that I've been dealing with it. And I'm starting to realise I can't believe the power of the habit and the power of just keeping the momentum going, because it's satisfying to just keep it going. It's satisfying to be able to say, wow, I've done that every single day for a week. I can see it kind of clocking up. So I use an app for meditating that is just like a timer bell, and it just gives me kind of a timer bell at the beginning, bell at the end. And I just use it because it's handy to kind of time my meditations, but it also tracks my meditations. And then I get to go and look back at my statistics and see those minutes kind of adding up, and that kind of accountability can be really powerful as well. But you don't really need the accountability on an app or a screen or even written down. Although I would say that if you're not using apps for those kinds of things, writing it down somewhere might be a really valuable way as well to make yourself feel like, oh, I've achieved something. I've really done something here that I think is powerful. I think the best part is that I can tell that I'm feeling better because of what I'm doing. I can tell that I'm feeling more clarity as a result of doing so much meditation. I can tell that I'm feeling more attuned with my spiritual side, even though I'm not doing a lot of spiritual practice with bells and whistles on it. Like there's still this sense of I'm connecting to my altar, I'm connecting to that sacred space. And as I say, I think at some point when I feel like I have a bit more space and time, and when the motivation strikes me, I'm going to be in a very good place and in a very good habit to start incorporating new ideas and new practices and so on. So yeah, I'm very aware that I went through phases like this in the past, and I even made a video at one point quite a while ago, maybe even 2 years ago, when I started getting up early. I made a few videos at that time actually about getting up early, about my morning routine and that kind of thing. And I did slip out of those habits again. But I think this time I am hoping that every single time this happens, I'm going to learn again and have it just reinforced for me how important it is to reincorporate those habits as quickly as humanly possible, and just to sort of reestablish that pattern, reestablish things as soon as I feel like I can. And I think what I'm going to try in future, if I'm going through a phase of being really, really exhausted and I really feel like I need a lot of rest, is like I say, notice it very early on and give myself that breathing room very early on. But then after a number of days, maybe say to myself, right, well, I'm still feeling very lethargic, I'm still feeling exhausted, I don't feel like picking back up where I left off, but you know what, I'm going to try doing it anyway for a few days, and if I really am still feeling terrible, then fine, I can scale it back again. But just to not let myself off the hook too much. So one of the things I'm thinking of doing is incorporating maybe some kind of rule. I'm kind of hesitant to say rule. I don't know if I want to get really authoritarian about this with myself. But so for example, Matt Diavella on YouTube, he has, I think it's the 2-day rule. He's not allowed to skip exercise for more than 2 days in a row. I'm sure if he's actually sick that he'll make an exception to that. But as a rule, you know, no more than 2 days. So I'm kind of toying with the idea of like maybe incorporating something like that. Like 2 days might not be quite enough, maybe 3, something like that, but to not allow myself to go more than that amount of days unless I realise that it's absolutely necessary. Abandoning my morning routine, maybe that for me seems to be the key. That seems to be what really kind of kicks me into gear and really keeps me going and makes me feel like I'm just on top of things and in control and so on. So yeah, I might need to try incorporating a rule, maybe not calling it a rule, maybe a guideline, a recommendation. I like to be gentle with myself with these things because I'm a bit of a rebel, and if I feel like I'm imposing too many rules on myself, I will start to kick back. So yeah, it's a kind of a balancing thing. But I really just would recommend to anyone who's struggling with this kind of thing, don't lose heart and just keep experimenting with different things. And I think the perfect balance between knowing yourself really well, like really well enough, and recognizing your own little signs that you need to take the foot off the pedal a little bit, that you need to take the foot off the gas for a few days, like really learning when you need to do that and just to go with it. And just to say, you know, you might have really wanted to go out for that run, or you might have really wanted to do that ritual, or do whatever it is, whatever kind of high energy activity it is that you had planned. You might be like, oh no, but I don't want to. But if you really feel like you need to kind of push it back a few days, then just do it. Just leave it a few days. But schedule it in and come back to it later, and make sure you actually come back to it later and don't leave it too long, would be my recommendation before you at least try to get yourself just back on track. Okay, I'm going to leave it there because I think I have talked for quite a while now, but I hope that this has helped somebody. I don't know if this is a topic that a lot of you find interesting. I find that these videos tend to get slightly lower views, but I feel like if it does affect you, that it's going to affect you a lot. Like, it's going to be a big thing in your life, because I know it is for me. So I'm hoping that for those of you that this is interesting for, that it will actually be helpful in some way. I'd love to know your thoughts down below. As always, you know, leave a comment, let me know if you struggle with this and what your solutions have been, or have you been able to come up with any solutions. And yeah, I guess I'll be making a video again on this the next time that I fall off the wagon or something. We'll see.